If you were the first daughter, the first granddaughter, or the girl everyone called so mature for her age, this video may explain why you are tired in a way sleep does not fix. Maybe you weren't born responsible. Maybe you were trained to be. You learned to read moods, prevent arguments, help before being asked, stayed quiet when things felt tense, and carry what no child should have been carrying. Now, at 50, 60, or beyond, you may still be asking yourself, why do I feel guilty when I rest? Why does saying no feel like I'm doing something wrong? Why do I know what everyone else needs, but have to pause when someone asks what I want? Let me tell you a story about a girl who learned far too young to hold the door. She was 15, newly back from boarding school, still learning the shape of her house again, lying awake listening for a car in the driveway because memory had taught her to listen. It was an arrangement she and her mother came to without ever quite naming it. On the nights her father came home unsteady, the kind that turned into arguments, she would tell her mother, pretend to be asleep, I'll get the door. She wasn't trying to be a martyr. She was doing the mathematics a protector does. If I sit here, she doesn't have to. If I open the door, there'll be no drama. If I stay awake, maybe I can keep things calm. It felt less like sacrifice and more like strategy. And underneath the strategy, something quieter and angrier was bubbling up. She didn't have the language for it yet. She just knew who she was protecting and why. She didn't have to do that for long because her mother, in the practical way mothers who survived learn to be, found the solution. She gave her father a key, kept his food warm in the oven, and the nights of listening for the car ended almost as simply as they had begun. But something had already happened in that girl. She had learnt a lesson that would outlive the arrangement by decades. She had learned that she was the one who could open the door, who could hold the door. She was capable, useful, and a lesson like that doesn't leave when the reason for it does. It just goes looking for the next door to hold. That was her door, but it isn't only hers. Maybe your door looked different. Maybe you were the one who translated for a parent who never learned the language of the country you grew up in, carrying grown up conversations in a child's mouth. Maybe you were the one raising your younger siblings because both parents worked or because one parent couldn't. Maybe you were the one who learned to read a parent's mood before he'd even taken off his coat, adjusting yourself around a weather system that was never your job to forecast. Maybe there was no single dramatic night, just years of being the calm one, the capable one, the one who didn't need looking after because she was too busy looking after everyone else. Different doors, different houses, the same girl underneath, deciding far too young that her worth would be measured in what she could hold. Before I go further, I want to say this clearly. This isn't about blaming our families. Many of them were just doing the best that they could do with what they had. They were surviving too, but doing their best not always mean we were protected from becoming responsible too young. For many first daughters, that responsibility did not end when childhood ended. It followed us. It followed us into friendships, marriages, motherhood, work, caregiving, community, and every room where someone needed something. And we instinctively stepped forward. We became the women who could be counted on, the women who noticed tension, made the phone calls, smoothed over awkwardness, carried emotional weight, and said, "It's fine," even when it wasn't. We agreed to things we didn't want to do because saying no felt like letting someone down in a way our body could not tolerate. We stayed quiet in rooms where we should have spoken up because speaking might tip something over we had spent years learning to keep steady. We took on what wasn't ours to carry because that is what capa- capable girls do. And we have been capable for a long time. Nobody had to ask us to keep doing it. We had already decided who we were: the reliable one, the strong one, the understanding one, the one who could handle it. And here is where it becomes tricky because being capable is not a bad thing. Being loving is not a bad thing, nor is being generous, thoughtful, sensitive, and aware of others. That's not a flaw. The problem begins when you are only allowed to be those things, when your yes becomes automatic, when your body says no, but your mouth keeps saying, of course, when you know exactly what everyone else needs, but when someone asks you what you want, there's a pause, a real pause, as if the question has to be translated from a language you once knew but have not spoken in years. That is one of the quiet costs of being the first daughter or the first granddaughter. Not one dramatic loss, but 1,000 small surrenders, each one reasonable on its own, easy to explain, each one adding up to a woman who eventually has to relearn the most basic thing a child should never have had to give away: her own sense of self. For her, it took her body to make her stop, not a perfect conversation or some beautiful moment where everything suddenly made sense. Her body simply refused to carry what it had been carrying. And in that refusal, something old and long overdue finally surfaced. I'm done giving until I break. Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe your body has said it through exhaustion or resentment, or maybe through tears that come out of nowhere. Or it comes in that heavy feeling when someone asks for one more thing of you and you think, I cannot do this anymore, even though another part of you is already preparing to say yes. That is the moment many of us finally begin to hear ourselves again. Not loudly at first, not confidently, just honestly. And the question that began to change things for her was very simple. Do I want this? Not do they need it? Not can I manage it? Not will they be upset? Do I want this? Do I have the capacity? Do I have the time, the desire? Or am I about to step in out of habit the way I've been stepping in since I was 15? That question may sound small, but for a woman who has spent decades being useful, it can feel almost radical because first daughters are often not taught to pause. We are taught to respond, to anticipate, to move quickly towards the need. Now there's a pause, and that pause changes everything. It doesn't mean we become selfish or that we stop loving people. It doesn't mean we close our hearts and become hard. It means we finally stop abandoning ourselves in order to keep everyone else comfortable. Sometimes the pause is just one breath before answering. Sometimes it's saying, let me think about that and get back to you. Sometimes it's noticing the guilt and not letting it make the decision, because guilt is not always a sign that you have done something wrong. Sometimes guilt is just the feeling of breaking an old pattern, and that is where the adult woman begins to meet the girl who learned too early that love meant carrying more than her share. She does not shame that girl or tell her she was foolish. She doesn't say, why did you let this happen? Instead, she says, of course, you learned to do that. It helped you survive, belong, and helped you feel safe. But we didn't have to keep living that way forever. That is where something begins to soften. Not overnight, but imperfectly, slowly. The woman starts coming back to herself. She still opens doors. That hasn't changed. She is still by nature someone who notices what her room needs. She still cares, still loves deeply, still steps towards people more often than away. But now there's a pause first, a breath where there used to be none. Do I want this? Is this mine to hold? And in that pause, something her younger self never had the chance to ask finally gets asked. If you were the first daughter, the first granddaughter, or the responsible girl in your family, I wonder what you learned to carry too early. Were you the peacekeeper, the translator, the helper, the one who made sure everyone else was okay? The one who grew up too fast? And more importantly, are you still carrying it? I would love to hear from you in the comments. What was the door you learned to hold? And is there one you're finally ready to stop holding? If somewhere in this story you recognized yourself, I'd like you to know this. You didn't imagine the weight, nor were you weak for feeling tired. You weren't selfish for wanting space, and you're allowed, finally, to ask the question many of us were never taught to ask. is this mine to hold? I hope this day brings you joy from my heart to yours. Bye for now.